Gladly. Good afternoon. So starting with Chair Martin,
I'm here, present, yes.
Director Millibar, and Director Palmer.
Here.
Excellent. All of the committee members are here.
Good, we'll move on to item 3, discussion items. 3A happens to be DCA fiscal year 24-25 budget overview and approach. As an informational item, pass this on to our Executive Director, Bradner.
Chair Martin, happy to be here this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I have a presentation today that's going to lay out the committee meeting goals and objectives, approach, and then a timeline at the end for how we're going to work our way through the rest of the planning process for next fiscal year's budget. Claudia, if we could move to the next slide, please. So the agenda is broken down first into the approach and requirements aspects. We do have a number of governing documents and other approaches that we need to follow that help shape the timeline. I am going to review the work breakdown structure that we have developed within the organization and how we segregate and separate our budgets, which also align now with our in-progress master schedule. So we'll review the work breakdown structure. Then we've got the example budget information that we used last fiscal year. I think our intention is to use similar materials for this process, but would welcome any feedback from the committee. And then lastly, we'll close with fiscal year 24-25 planning timeline, laying out the next meetings, what we intend to cover and how the process will work between now and the June board meeting, which would be the intended point at which the new budget would be considered and adopted by the board. Next slide. Keep going. Thank you. So the Finance Committee was established as a Board of Directors standing committee. This is a Brown Act body to provide the initial review and recommendations to the Board of Directors regarding the following items. First and foremost, what we're here to talk about today is the adoption of the annual DCA budget and any proposed modifications or amendments. There would also be another item in the fall to review, prepare, and review the annual DCA financial audit information, the annual comprehensive financial report, or similar other reports that would be necessary to document and memorialize our financial conditions. That would be any other finance or financial related items as delegated by the Board of Directors or as requested by the Executive Director or the Treasurer. So as we sit here right now, we know for sure that the committee has 2 items, and it's those first 2 bullets: the budget development process now, and then the audit in the fall. Next slide, please. So the requirements, these are really more based on our governance and how we operate. We run on a fiscal year cycle, so that's July 1st of every year to June 30th the following year. The DCA Board of Director approval for the fiscal year budget is generally needed in June, by the end of June, generally set for the June board meeting, which this year is June 20th. June 20th. The joint exercise of powers agreement. So that's the agreement between the Department of Water Resources and the DCA that delegates the authority for the DCA to design and construct the facilities. Requires that the DCA provide the draft fiscal year budget to DWR 60 days prior to adoption. And this is to fulfill their fiduciary oversight responsibilities as described in the JEPA. The DCA currently operates under a task order system that is on an annual basis. So we do not extend task orders, and I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. And then we do use our fiscal year budget and scope to develop the annual baseline, which is that schedule that we include in the monthly report at the very end. It does go into the monthly report at the very end, that sequence of activities that we talk about at the end, that schedule. But more importantly, it feeds the baseline that's in the middle of that monthly report, which is that cash flow plan versus actual report. That comes directly from the budget development work that we do in terms of scope and distributing those activities and using that to develop the baseline. Yes.
I have a quick question. When you say you do not extend task orders, does that mean that they're supposed to finish that work by the end of that budget year? What if they do have something that's going past that? They just get
Good question. Next slide. So it's in the second bullet here. So what we have to do currently is descope it from one task order, move it and add it to the scope of a new task order. So we do very rigorously manage at this point the fiscal year boundaries. We don't cross them. We did a couple of years ago when I was starting, we would extend task orders and on a case-by-case basis. That had some advantages, but it had some disadvantages. The biggest disadvantage is that we were not able to close out the financials for the previous year for several months, trailing behind the completion of any extended task orders because we have to get final invoices. Sometimes those would trail. All that stuff has to get processed, paid out, and eventually we're able to close the books. So it really delayed our ability to conduct our annual audit and delayed our ability to close out the finances.
That's not a problem.
So it's a bit of paperwork. What we have to do if we know that there's an item that's scoped and budgeted under a task order and they're not going to get to it, or we've decided to delay it, it could be intentional. We just have to go through the process of descoping it, amending their task order. We just go through the process of amending their task order to remove that scope language, remove the associated budget from that task order, and then assign it, add it to either a in-process task order or a new dedicated task order on its own. So it's just paperwork, but it's the way we work now. I can tell you, I do not believe it's a system that will work well in the future conditions where we are likely to be doing a lot more work with I think it will be much more difficult to manage that way, but for now we make it work. And
Yeah, I would think that with some of the larger projects, the larger thing going on, that it may not be viable for the ones that we're contracting with.
I think the period of time we're in now is a really good experimental phase where we try different things. We see what works and what doesn't work. We understand what the constraints are. We figure out where our contractual requirements are, what we might want to consider revising for the future. So this to me is really kind of a stress testing period in terms of how our systems work and helping us to think about and deal with in the future what we'll need for those later periods of time when we are, when this current system is probably going to not be able to handle that type of paperwork. So just some other approach and expectations within the organization. Our billing rates do tend to be all inclusive, meaning we try and avoid having folks submit for expense reimbursements. That's a particular item that's very challenging within the process as it currently stands. And so our preference is to go through an annual process of forecasting what we think those costs will be and building them into the rates rather than having to deal with direct submission of expenses for reimbursement. It just becomes a very complicated process. Because of our connection to and requirements that a lot of our financial work flows through the state and then down to Metropolitan for the treasurer, it's a pretty complicated process. And so one of the ways that we deal with that currently is through all-inclusive rates. Again, that's something that I think we're gonna have to revisit for the future. So that's probably one of those other items that we're spending a lot of time evaluating now and contemplating alternatives, and we've got the time to think about what is the best way. There's not going to be a silver bullet, I can guarantee that, but that is something we're working on. But for now, this is the approach. The third bullet, so anything that was not included in the annual budget does go through our change management process. Sorry, can you go back one more? We do have a formal change management process. And so, one of the benefits of the way that we operate now is we do have very tight fiscal year controls. We set the scope and budget each year. Each year is essentially a reset in terms of what we're doing. We create our new plan for the year. It's less likely that things kind of stretch and morph and, that can be a little bit more difficult to track over time. Now the system we have in place forces an annual reconciliation where everything gets reset, cleared out, and started over. So it does have benefits, but any items that we don't capture in that annual process do go through our change management process. We do use we use unallocated reserves within the executive office. This is our main principal allowance that we include within the budget. And so that resides in the executive office. I'll show you, and when we get to it, what that tends to look like, but you'll remember, I think last year we went into the budget with a $1.75 million unallocated reserve. Previous years, we've gone as low as 500,000 on some of our really low years, but I think we quickly augmented that early because it's sort of an uncomfortable place to be at the beginning of the fiscal year.
There a cap? Do you foresee a cap on the reserves like that?
Again, for now, no, but we will manage reserves very differently when we enter construction phase, because what we're talking about is a very different topic, or a very different form of unallocated reserve. Right now, it's all about the work that we're doing for, the engineering work, the field work, the permit support work, which is pretty easy to manage. Did you have a comment, Josh?
No, I was just going to highlight it. It's just important to remember that our unallocated reserves are different than the reserves that you're used to at your member agencies, which, are in lay for another thing. It's a very specific definition. I appreciate Graham explaining.
Okay, next slide, please. So the process that we take on every year, first of all, we think about, and we've been collecting these ideas through the year. We identify the scope of work that we would like to tackle for the subject fiscal year. Confirm first that we have the contractual coverage within all of the contracts in place to perform the scope of work that we'd like to do. If not, that would be an off-ramp to procurement. So, but assuming we do have the contractual coverage in place, we request cost estimates from the contractors based on the scope of work that we provide. Contractors develop a level of effort and cost using the contract rate schedules. Provide that back to the DCA team for review. We work through a pretty collaborative process to negotiate those task orders, budgets, and then also confirm that although we may have the contractual coverage, we need to also confirm capacity within those contracts. That could lead to another board action if necessary, depending on the not to exceed amounts associated with those contracts and whether we're butting up against or potentially exceeding that. Lastly, at that point, we go through a cycle, review, update, finalize. Within that review update process includes obtaining DWR's review comments and thoughts and concurrence on that draft budget. All of that converges in June for board of directors adoption.
Graham, when do you begin your work to define the scope of work for the upcoming fiscal year?
I guess I'm not joking when I say it's sort of July 1. We do, although we set our plan and scope for the current fiscal year to take place July 1, we're already thinking about what is either things that we considered for that fiscal year that we decided to either defer due to budget limitations, or it's just not the right time to do it. So we kind of have that running plan. So it sort of starts from the beginning of the fiscal year. And then as the year plays out, things kind of morph and change. And we just keep our eye on the direction of the program and what we want to be prioritizing in that coming year. It's something that's kind of always there.
Back to a previous slide, because I think it's pretty obvious we're facing a tight schedule with the 60-day notice to DWR for the draft budget.
So I have a timeline
You
at
have a
the back.
timeline. Okay.
And
I
it's-
figured you might. So
Yeah, it's my intention. We're going to run in parallel. This is the way we've always run in parallel, in that we work pretty collaboratively with DWR through this process. All the while, we're continuing to refine and adjust and refine and adjust. When they've had a chance to digest what's being intended and we've talked our way through the scope, usually there's some additional tweaking that may come through that process. Once we kind of converge it all together, it's a pretty easy check-in to come back and say, all right, we got your comments. We had some other changes over here. Some other revisions came in here. This is where we've landed. Everybody good. And we move forward. So I'm envisioning a very similar process here. Okay, let's go next slide. I think we made it past this one. We can go one more. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears to our work breakdown structure. Some pretty small text, especially on the screen over there. So don't try and read it, unless you really want to. I'll talk about the key phases here, but our program management team has developed the work breakdown structure. This organizes all of our budget activities within the program. It's developed for all phases, extending all the way from the early initiation phases, all the way through closeout commissioning of the project. So we've already laid that out within our system. That allows us to understand where we're headed. We've got a plan for and how to engage these different phases. The current phases that are active are the program management office. This is really a cross-cutting support organization. I'm within the program management office. Josh, Claudia are within the program management office, as are a number of other categories, and I'll talk in a minute about those. But that's all these items that are sort of in this purple column right there. Those are all part of the program management office. We've got program initiation. So this is the engineering work to support the high level evaluation of alternatives for the initial environmental permitting phases. So this was really looking at various alternatives, various concepts that the department could consider. This phase ends when all major permits are obtained, and the program is really positioned at that point for implementation. We are still in the program initiation phase. There are still several permits that are outstanding. You heard Carrie update in the previous meeting, next steps in terms of permits, and we've still got several more years and various regulatory bodies and public processes to get through before we're actually ready to implement anything. We do have the program delivery phase of the program. These are pre-design activities currently, including further evaluation of the preferred project. This is to support those ongoing permit activities, provide better definition of features, design criteria, contracts, and interfaces. This is largely the information support side of it. A lot of the engineering activities are still going to be performed within the program initiation. That's the in-house engineering activities within the DCA still reside within program initiation. The data collection that we are looking now would fall into the program delivery phase, the early aspects of program delivery. Next slide, please. So the program management office, and the board will recall that when we do our draft presentation of the budget and more detailed presentation of the budget to the full board, we go into some detail on all of these and define the activities and also describe the assigned budget with these activities. So this is really just a preview of what we will get into in more detail as we work our way through this process. We have opened up some new program management office activities. We're now up to 13 budget categories. Last year we had 10. The new ones that we have opened up are at the bottom of the list there. The engineering management, geotechnical management, survey and mapping management. So these are placeholders in some cases for the future. In terms of the geotechnical management, this is where the actual activity to guide and manage the geotechnical services under program delivery would reside. That's where that effort would reside. We've also been ramping up quite a bit on health and safety, quality, sustainability. So that's the next three above the three I just mentioned there. We've now got full-time resources dedicated for health and safety, quality, sustainability. We've really been putting a lot into this and do intend to come back to the board. I think probably our next update at some point in a meeting, not in the not too distant future, would be on sustainability. I think we've got some good information to share. So I already touched on the others at the bottom. So any questions on the PMO before we go to the next? Okay. So program initiation includes the engineering and the initial fieldwork functional areas to support the DWR planning and permitting efforts. The engineering group was and still is responsible for delivering and conducting the technical studies and analyses to support conceptual design and documentation. The fieldwork components are transitioning from transitioning to a early project feature under the program delivery, and I'll talk about that here in just a second. But that still is intended to support the ongoing permit activities and development of design criteria, project packaging. So just better understanding of the project conditions, the site configurations, the layouts, better understanding of the impact and schedule associated with those facilities. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the fieldwork group has, the fieldwork we've done for years under the initial study mitigated negative declaration was performed under the program initiation phase. But that work is now transitioning to the program delivery phase, supporting further evaluation, design, and permitting. Next slide, please. Program delivery begins with a pre-designed set of activities, which include the further evaluation of the preferred project to support these ongoing permit activities. The project delivery functional area activities right now are just limited to field investigations, which includes geotechnical studies, field surveying, and other exploratory work, utilities, potholing, that kind of thing. Any questions on the work breakdown structure?
Last is just building up. It isn't really doing anything other than just building up to lay out the groundwork.
That is correct.
Okay.
In terms of last year's budget information, we tend to present information at a couple of levels. This is our highest level presentation. And so in this case, you can see the budget broken out by the phases, program management office and program initiation. So you can expect this year to have a third phase underneath it for program delivery. That's probably all there is to say about this. Next slide. We also have a next level down, which is the detailed workbook of information. This rolls up to the organizational support functions. And so within, for instance, the program management office, next you see the PMO executive office. That's a level that you would have seen on the summary on the previous slide. Underneath that, we have subcategories associated with different activities that have individual line item budgets identified. Next slide, please. We also, we can slice and dice our information in a number of different ways. One that we do find very useful is by vendor, and we do disclose this within our planning, our budget planning processes, budget adoption processes, and then it's tracked throughout the year within the monthly report. Next slide, please. So in terms of our budget planning timeline, go ahead, next slide. So this is the last slide of the presentation. This is our timeline for the fiscal year. The red bar across the bottom, the status bar, indicates where we are today at the April 18th board meeting. We began our budget preparation process back in late February, had a kickoff meeting with our internal contractors back in March. Once we had started thinking about and ready to communicate the scope, start to request budgets, going back to those steps that we described, having those initial conversations to get that underway. April 8th, we're able to pull back all of those individual contractor budgets, compile them, and start to see where we stack up. We will provide the draft information to DWR tomorrow for their internal review. There is some coordination and sort of ongoing back and forth that will occur following that. Our plan next would be at the May board meeting, May 16th, to at the regular session board meeting, review the draft budget with the full board, and then follow the meeting just like we are today with the second meeting of the finance committee to go a bit more into the details on the budget, answer any questions, have a bit more information to share about how and what the budget entails. Then that would be followed by, that's right. The June 6th Finance Committee meeting is a standalone meeting. It's not aligned with a DCA board meeting. That's intentional. It's sort of at that midpoint between the May and June board meetings where we would come back, convene this body, review the final draft of the budget, finalize and make recommendations for next year's fiscal year. And then follow that on June 20th with a presentation to the full board of the final budget for DCA adoption.
We are having a DCA board meeting in May.
We are having a DCA board meeting in May. Yes, that's correct.
Graham, I understand the need to, what appears to me, compressing the schedule a little bit this year. in future years, are you intending to start the process earlier with the finance committee? Or is this typical of what?
Yeah, I think it's fairly typical only because we need, we need to have the budget to a place that we can talk about it. At the moment right now, the budget is not drafted to the point that we could have a public meeting about it. And so I do expect it will be a similar timeline next year, but I'm certainly open to revisions or suggestions. This is obviously a new committee for the DCA, and I do want it to work, work as intended and provide sufficient time for review and disclosure of what it is we're doing.
Board meeting with the finance committee following it. Will the finance committee see the same presentation or a higher level of detail, or what is the intention?
The intention would be to show a high level summary of the draft budget at the board meeting, the regular board meeting, and then drill into a bit more detail with the finance committee. And then drill into a bit more detail with the finance committee. Those would be draft numbers, so they would be subject to change and input from the committee, subject to additional analysis and review. But we would review at a high level with the full board and then drill into details with the committee.
Okay,
I had did you go ahead? I don't want to hog the.
Back to the slide that showed the vendors. When you started the project, were these vendors chosen by looking at a number of firms that was gonna do each phase here? And how do you? And how much it's gonna cost and, to be cost efficient going forward. Do you say, you chose these guys and they continue in that same capacity each year? Is that right?
So actually, I think I will start it out, but I'd like to also introduce Adrian Brown, our new procurement manager, and Adrian was actually formerly part of the program and was in place with a number of these procurements. They are competitive procurements, but Adrian, I don't want to steal your thunder. Do you want to just describe a little bit about the process and then I can augment?
Sure. So yes, they were originally procured through a request for qualifications or RFP process. We brought on an initial number of vendors, geotech, real estate, right of way, design, and program management. And so as the project continues, we will also be looking at whether or not we would go back out to procure those services again when we get to a certain stage, if you will. A good example is the AECom contract. We had great conversations and discussions about whether or not we would be at a point where we should extend that contract or we should go back out to bid because the volume is about to increase. But at this juncture, we made the decision that we're more likely going to request an extension, a brief one at that. And then at a later stage, when we get to another phase of the project, we probably will go out to bid. And that will ensure that our contractors are giving us a good price, if you will, for the ratepayers and for the taxpayers.
you talk about going out to bid. These are professional services that are being provided, correct? So this is based on qualification.
Based on qualifications, and we do have subject matter experts who sit on panels and who go through the interview process with those firms. And they select the highest ranking candidate. And then after that, we enter into contract negotiations with them.
So when you use the terminology, go out for bid, are we talking about construction? Or are we talking about proposals for professional services?
So I'm from procurement environment. We tend to use a very generic statement. Go out for bid means basically, in my mind, it's, I'm trying to get you the best value. So like if it's construction, it'll be the lowest responsible bidder. And then when it's for professional services, it's qualitative. So you try to get the best consulting firm to assist you.
Different criteria on that one. Could you tell me, I'm writing things down. What is your last name again?
It's Brown.
Brown?
Mhm.
Oh, that was hard.
And
Okay.
we will, it's my intention, I'd like to bring Adrian back for a senior leadership spotlight in the relative near future. So I know we just pulled him up here and kind of put him on the spot, but we're glad to have Adrian on board. He has history with the program, which is a huge benefit. And very capable, and has helped a lot of agencies work their way through issues and procurements. And so we can talk more about that at a later time, but Adrian.
Thank you very much. I do have a quick question on this slide, because right there we have Baker Tilly as executive director, but now we know that we have gone. So should that be included in there, or
This
Is
is
it
just
not-
an old, this is an old table
this is
from
just
last
an
year. It's an
example table?
example of the type of information that we share. And
Okay,
share it
okay.
with the
So-
board, share with the public. So we've got lots of different ways that we assemble the information, and we will be thinking about with the finance committee, is there a different level of information that we ought to consider? Is there something that's appropriate for the public to understand that we haven't shared in the past? So that's all what I think we should.
I would
be
want to
thinking
see more of an updated
Yeah.
vendor. list.
Absolutely.
Okay.
There will be an updated vendor list included with the new budget.
One more question on, when you get into the construction and say it's a design build type of situation, is it possible to evaluate in enough detail so that the firm that you chose, maybe they're not the lowest bidder, but they're more likely to, be more cost efficient as they get into the design build phase? I mean, do those kind of considerations enter into the selection process?
I'll answer, and then maybe Adrian, if you want to add on. I think one of the key words that Adrian said was responsive. So that's a key aspect of the evaluation is although they may be, although you may get a bid that is the lowest bid, is it credible and responsive to the requirements of the project? I think that's a very important consideration through the process. Adrian, anything to add?
Sure. One thing, when we were doing the design or the EDM, innovation was a scoring factor. We had a number of firms present ideas that they had. One example was one firm suggested adding 2 or 3 additional TBMs to the project. That way you could finish your project schedule maybe another 3 or 4 years in advance, shaving off the schedule and saving about $1 to $2 billion. So yes, you can add those kind of quantitative items to the RFPs or requests for qualifications that you're going to be doing.
That could save you a considerable amount of money and time if you have those kind of aspects, to consider.
Yes, and I believe currently internally, there is discussion about innovations, and I believe there's going to be some conversations that are going to be coming later date to describe them to the board.
We are at a very important stage of the project. There's an approved project that documented through the final impact through the environmental impact report. We are, and that has a defined project description. And so although, for instance, having additional tunnel boring machines could speed up construction and shave the schedule, it would also add tremendous impact likely throughout the project. So that's certainly something that all has to be considered as the project evolves. Value engineering is a big part of what is in front of us. And those considerations in terms of trade-offs and value are just a huge part of that. And ultimately, DWR will need them to make the decision around what the permit implications are and how to deal with that for the project.
And I'm being there for the ribbon cutting and I'm wondering in timeline, will I need a cane, a walker or a wheelchair?
Any other questions?
One more, Graham, before we, not end, but another question. The team is in place already for the 24-25 budget year, correct? So there's or request for proposal for technical or qualification-based work, or right now the team is in place and they're making their proposals based on the scope of work that's defined by whom?
So we have a number of essentially master services agreements that are in place. I think largely, we are in place, but we are going to be bringing to the board probably next month a request to extend. We need a contract extension. We need to revisit some not to exceed amounts. So there will be some board work required for next fiscal year, and we intend to bring that back to the board in May. But in terms of procurements, Adrian, I don't know that we have any large procurements planned for next fiscal year.
Not currently, no, we do not have large procurements planned at this point.
Right now, the priority is to get the best qualified team, the team with the resources to perform and negotiate a reasonable, cost-effective price.
Absolutely. But I think to your question earlier, Director Millibar, just because a team member is in place does not mean that, does not mean that there's not a real emphasis on performance and a requirement that every team member and team that's involved in the program delivers. So, I think we've talked about this in the past. I mean, occasionally there are moves and actions that should be taken for the benefit of the program. And that's certainly, high on my list of things that I pay attention to. But I think we're in a position now where we have what we need, aside from a couple of contract modifications that we'll have to deal with at the board. I think we have what we need for the phase that we're still in. There is a time coming when there will be some very potentially large transitions in terms of the work that the DCA is doing. We have a lot to do to be ready for that, and there will certainly be a lot of procurement associated with that, but we're not there yet. So that concludes the presentation, and really that includes the agenda for today's meeting. It was really a ramp up and preparation meeting for where we're going with the committee. Next steps, I guess any other feedback on the timeline? Does that look reasonable to the committee?
And can we have, what I'd love to see is, some of the numbers and stuff ahead of time so I can kind of chew on them. Not that it would make any difference, but I'd like to chew on them anyway.
Yeah, I think that's right. So part of what we will also discuss and share in advance is materials so that you're not seeing it for the first time in the committee meeting and you've got time to chew on it.
And I don't need Cheetos.
Chair Barton, it looks like we have a question from Bernadette Robertson, who is the controller for the DCA.
Okay,
Hi, I just wanted to make sure that we coordinate because there's gonna be new items for your budget so that we can get the system ready to handle that for fiscal year 25. So I'll work with Claudia on that.
Thank you, Bernadette. That's true. Yes, good acknowledgement, Bernadette. We will coordinate. Thank you.
Thank you.
okay, thank you for your comment. Excuse me. We are now at the public, yes, we do public comments at the end. All right, that concludes item 3A. We move to item 4, verbal reports, if any. Do we have any verbal reports? We have no verbal reports. We move to item 5, which is Public comment, members of the public may address the committee on matters that are within the committee's jurisdiction, but not on the agenda at this time. Speakers are generally limited to 3 minutes each. However, the chair may further limit this time when reasonable based on circumstances. Persons wishing to speak may do so remotely through the electronic meeting link by scanning the QR code above or teleconference number when recognized by the chair. The DCA encourages public comments and requests that speakers present their remarks in a respectful manner within the established time limits and focus on issues which directly affect the DCA or are within its jurisdiction. Do we have any public comments under item 5?
Chair Martin, we do not have any public comment requests.
Then that brings us to item 6, adjournment. Thank you, staff, and thank you, committee members, for our first committee meeting. I think it was productive. I think we have a good idea going forward, and we are hereby adjourned.